Hi, welcome to the Mohua show. My name is Mohua Chinappa and I am an author, entrepreneur and ex-housewife. This podcast is about everything from business to technology to arts to lifestyle, but done and spoken ईमानदारी से. Hi, in this episode we have with us Aman Singh Maharaj, a South African author of Indian origin. Aman's debut novel, A Dalliance with Destiny, has received critical acclaim for its compelling narrative and masterful storytelling. The novel takes us on a mystical journey to India where the protagonist embarks on a quest for spiritual enlightenment. Aman is also a columnist and a storyteller who writes on topics of national and political interest for the Indian diaspora. We are thrilled to have Aman with us today to talk about his life, his work, and his latest book. Welcome to the show, Aman. Can you tell a little bit about your background, your upbringing? How did your family and cultural heritage influence your writing? For most writers, we're influenced with a little bit of our past. Tell us a little bit about yours.
So I'm a South African Indian of depending on which side you look at. On my mom's side, I'm third generation. My Nana was born in India. And on my dad's side, I'm fourth generation. I think it was my great-grandfather who was born in India. A lot of Indians were deceived by the British Raj when they left India. Actually, they were not. They didn't leave voluntarily. A lot of them were kidnapped. A lot of them were lied to that it was from 1837 up to about 1911. It was under this system called indentureship by the British Raj, which was a kind of slavery. But when slavery itself was abolished, they took up this kind of system. Our forefathers were promised, during the droughts in India and when there were high taxes by the British Raj, that life in South Africa, Mauritius, Suriname, British Guyana, and Trinidad is much better. The streets of South Africa are paved with gold. They were very simple village people, and they believed it. And voila, 160 or 170 years, we are here, and we grew from 120,000 people to we're now sitting at about 1.4 million Indian people in South Africa, with 1 million of them based in the city of Durban. It's probably the largest concentration of Indians in one city outside of India itself. With regards to writing, I think what influenced my writing the most was the fact that I read a hell of a lot of books growing up. This is thanks to my mum, who took me to the municipal library when I was about 4 years old or 5 years old. When I couldn't even read, and somehow I started to read on my own. I don't know how I picked it up, and without being taught. And by the time I was about 7 or 8, I was reading, considerably thick-sized novels. But ultimately, I think, if you're going to write real literature that comes from deep within the soul, that comes from suffering. If you're writing pulp fiction and commercial literature, yes, it's totally different than, you're writing for the masses. But when you're writing that real, 19th or 18th century type literature, then it comes from a place of probably despair and suffering.
What inspired you to write A Dalliance with Destiny, and what was the writing process like? Did it make you delve into some very, very hard parts of your soul, of your life, of generational trauma? I would love you to talk about that today.
Look, it's not an autobiography. I deliberately made the character physically look very different, very, opposite to what I am. I made him uneducated. I made him almost guttural. He's a misogynist. I'd like to think I'm not, but that's for other people to say. So I didn't want people to mistake the character for me. He's not a very savory, kind of Mills and Bone kind of hero. He's very earthy and, I would say not a negative life, but a quest life. So he's not someone that many people can easily identify with until we go later in the novel and we see he's actually quite an intelligent person. It's just that life threw certain circumstances at him and he had to deal with such things. And it made him hate the world. So did I take experiences from my own life? I think every writer does. It's impossible not to. But what you do is you try and make it more readable. And so you put it on steroids so that readers themselves, find it more exciting to read. I don't think my life is exciting enough to write a story about, at least not yet. But yes, certainly we do take sort of certain incidents or behaviors, if not from ourselves, then from the people around us, and we put it into the novels.
The novel spans a century and is set in both South Africa and India. Talk a little bit about the research that went into creating, the historical and cultural backdrop of the story. That must have been a hell of a lot of work.
Honestly, because I've been to India so many times, I first went back in 1982 when I was 7 years old to India. And I've been about 18 times to India. I've probably traveled more of the length and breadth of India than the average citizen themselves, because, when a tourist visits a country, they tend to visit more of the states themselves. So my knowledge of India is pretty expansive. And then in terms of South Africa, there was not much research to do because I grew up here. So a lot of the sites and surroundings and the settings came from my memory. And like I said, with me having gone there so many times, I think the only places I haven't gone to are the far northeastern states like Mizoram and Nagaland and so forth. So I have a pretty good understanding of India. So if you can call my travels research, then yes, my travels have been what I used as my backdrop. But it was not deliberately done. It all came together almost accidentally into a novel.
You just mentioned about your protagonist and you said he's very earthy and not really likable till you go to the end of the story. So the protagonist of your novel is a man in his 30s and he's struggling to find his place in a changing world, So how did you approach the character development and did you face any challenges while you were portraying his journey?
When I first wrote the draft of the novel back in 2006, he was actually a Mills and Bone kind of hero. He was very lovable. He was a dashing kind of romantic figure that, woman would just go weak in the knees for. And when I read it for the first time, I got very irritated with myself when I read the first draft. I said, no, this is not exciting enough for me. It's too, if I'm going to write a Mills and Bones kind of story, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in my mind in terms of literature. It's just too commercial. So I had to tap deep into myself. And, I wouldn't say I have many negative traits, but whatever negative traits came out, I just sort of amplified it and I poured it into the character. So there are certain bits of me in the character himself, the archetype, but they are definitely being exaggerated to give it literary a feel. Was it a difficult process? I think there were times, yes. The challenge for me was, how will society accept this? Even though we are living in a kind of a Western society in South Africa, we're still Indians at the end of the day, and we are a lot more conservative than the other communities. So I was very nervous as to how it would be accepted. So that was the challenge. But writing about the character itself was not the challenge. It was the fear of the reprisal from society about me writing a kind of a book like this and about such a character. How would they accept it and would they judge me on it? But so far it's been fine. There have been a few people, who've questioned how could I write such a raunchy book. But, you're not going to, they say the trees with the most kind of fruit have the most stones thrown at it. So I take it on swear on my chin. You can't write a novel and expect people not to respond. And even a negative response is a 59.
Your Dalliance with Destiny has received critical acclaim for its compelling narrative and, the masterful storytelling that you've done. So, there are a lot of our listeners who may be wanting to embark on the writing journey. And can you share a little bit about the writing style and the themes that you've explored in your work?
I believe if you're going to become a writer, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Right now, compared to the 18th century, where writing was the only form of entertainment, in the 21st century, there are so many other competing forms of entertainment. And in the last 5 years alone, with the advent of Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these streaming channels, I can guarantee you, certainly in South Africa, the number of readership has dwindled. I think in India, there's still a big demand for reading, but in South Africa, it's definitely gone down. So I'm saying, don't count on writing being your livelihood. have a parallel career. At the same time, I don't believe anyone can just be a writer. I think we all have our unique talents that we are born with. And I believe this is my talent that was given to me. Whether it's a carryover from a previous life, it's hard for me to say. It means going into esoteric sort of discussion. But I believe everyone has, in Sanskrit, we call it a swadharma, which is that which is intrinsic to you. Somebody may have been born as unique sportsman, or somebody may be a pianist or so forth. At the end of the day, you have something, and you just got to do the introspection to find what it is. And it just so happened my mom gave me the kind of environment for me to flourish by providing me with access to many books that I was able to find out what my swadharma was.
The experiences of the Indian diaspora, in South Africa, which your writing, does describe. Can you talk about the challenges and opportunities of writing about this community? I mean, are there lots of stories that you think still needs to be retold or they've not been heard? And what sort of an impact do you think that your work will have, on the readers?
I think herein comes my criticism of Indian society. I'm talking about India. In India as a subcontinent itself, there's a huge sort of colonialist hangover where I find that many middle-class Indians believe they have not made it in life unless they move to the USA, UK, or Canada. And I always say, labor is very cheap. I'm talking about domestic help. So the middle class is able to afford maybe a driver or a few servants to clean the home, or a cook or a chef, and so forth. If you move to the UK, even as middle class or upper middle class, you are cleaning your own toilet. You are moving from maybe a house in Delhi in a nice suburb to these small brownstone homes in England, which are not really attractive to look at. And you will work equivalent to maybe a lower classes in India. Not that I'm judging the lower class. I'm saying you will have to put in that effort in terms of running a home. So, it's about this kind of mindset that I had to go challenge, because whenever I went to India and I said, listen, I'm from South Africa, they don't see South Africa as a country. They see Africa as a country. So the moment you say South Africa, they respond, oh, Africa. Like it's something so exotic, and suddenly, Africa just becomes one big giant country, and you can literally see it in their eyes. They're picturing huts and lions running around, and, that we're a bit of a backward country. There are a few of them who obviously, when South Africa joined the cricket fraternity post 1994, when we entered the democratic era, to know that South Africa is quite developed. But at the same time, the vast majority of Indians in India still think of South Africa or Africa as being very backward. And it was with this kind of mindset that I sort of had driving at the back of my head when I wrote the novel, that I need to convince Indians in India, if the book reaches those shores, that there's a lot more to South African Indians than the fact that they left as almost pariahs in the 1800s. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of classism. I'm not saying casteism, I'm talking about classism in India still. And, that sort of desire, like I said, seems to direct itself purely towards the Western countries like the USA, Canada, and UK. And I hope, my novel plays its small part in making people aware that, that's these Western countries are not the holy grail that they think it is. And if you look at India itself, as a developing nation, I believe it's jumping leaps and bounds ahead of many other Western countries at the moment.
With your book, Dalliance with Destiny, you have really delved into universal themes of identity and belonging. Like you just said right now that, you're trying to help people understand that it isn't really, all rosy and beautiful once you leave the country and you go out, which most Indian youth think that it's going to be different when they leave the country. So what would be those three things that you'd like the readers to take away from the author himself?
So there are a couple of themes and there are a couple of sub-themes. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I mean, it's quite a complex book. It's not easy reading. It's a novel that requires a fair amount of reflection. So the first theme is about, finding oneself. And, when I speak about finding oneself, immediately, a lot of people start thinking about eat, pray, love. And I think it's a lot more complex than that. So if you think of Eat, Pray, Love, the story or the film on steroids, this is what A Dalliance with Destiny is all about. It's about finding yourself. And although the cliche is about moving to or going to India, whenever someone wants to find themselves, they run away to India to an ashram to find themselves. And, when it becomes that cliched, a more intelligent reader will say, you know what, this plot has been done to death. But if you go into the nitty-gritty of the novel itself, you'll see the way it's done is not cliched at all. So that being the first one about finding your path in life, I think the second one is about dislocation. It's about, what do we call home? Is my home South Africa, where I've stayed for nearly 50 years as a citizen, or is my home in India, where my cultural sort of backdrop is from, my mother country, which would then go back more than 100 or 120 years, depending on which side of my family you look at. So it's about that dislocation and finding out your identity within that dislocation and whether it's even possible to find your identity. It's very difficult to say, just by introspection alone. Sometimes it takes experience and, life experiences that may happen, not just over days or months or years. It can be decades, and even then you will not find the answer. I think the third theme that we, comes out, in my mind, is about the redemption of a so-called negative character. Could a person redeem themselves in the eyes of a reader as they move along? It's a 400-page book. So there's plenty of space for the reader to go from hating the character to almost embracing him and understanding him, that he is a product of his past and, or his life experiences. And this is what it made him into. And we don't have to judge him for what he had to go through, but we can surely understand why he became what he became.
What advice do you have for aspiring writers, and how have you navigated the publishing industry?
The main thing is what I spoke about earlier. Make sure you have a parallel career, because writing for most writers does not pay the bills. It's a passion. It's something that you might have to pour money into because you have to put money into marketing, into distribution. Even if you have your own commercial publisher, which I have, it still costs you to start going to the literature festivals and going to the doing the book launches and so forth. So unless your book has done really well, like a Harry Potter or something, don't expect your book to be a money spinner. You do it from the point of view of a passion. So have that parallel career, have that education that ensures that you have a salary coming in. I think be aware that you have to be tenacious before you get published. I think I went through about 5 or 6 different publishers in South Africa. A lot of them accepted me, but they wanted to cut out a lot of the sort of polemic or controversial stuff. And I'm totally anti-censorship. But a lot of my people I know were rejected by all the South African publishers, and they tried overseas as well. And eventually, they gave up on that after about 5 or 6 years of trying. And they eventually tried out with, they went the self-publishing route, which, a lot of the writers are doing these days. So there's no judgment there. But if you're doing the self-publishing route, that's a very costly exercise, not just about the publishing, but the distribution as well. So you got to think very carefully about it before you embark upon this process. At the same time, enjoy the process. You'll find different emotions coming out of you as you write, because you're tapping not just into your own experiences, you're tapping into your own psyche as well. Because a lot of you will go, a lot you itself will go into the characters. Maybe not exactly the same, but it definitely will go into it. So just enjoy the process, but don't have high expectations.
Can you tell us about your upcoming projects and what you're working on, and what can your readers expect from your future work?
I really thought I'm going to be a one-hit wonder. I thought I'm going to write one book and this is going to be my magnum opus, and then I'm going to do articles and, newspaper columns and so forth. But I am there were many people who actually loved the book, who have become fans, and I say this in the most non-egotistical way possible, and they're insisting that I must write another one. It's a time-consuming process, not just in the writing itself, but the editing process is more time-consuming than writing it. So I think if somebody twists my arm just a little bit more, I'm going to probably end up writing my second novel. And most likely it'll be set in India. Unfortunately or fortunately, I still identify myself as Indian before I identify myself as South African. So, and I probably have a better understanding of India than I have of South Africa, despite being a citizen of South Africa. It will be set in India, and I just need to apply my mind as to what kind of plot I'm going to look at. But there are a few thoughts in my head, running around in my head.
We would be waiting with bated breath for your next book. And this was Aman Singh Maharaj, a South African author of Indian origin, with his debut novel, A Dalliance with Destiny. Thank you so much, Aman, for being on today's podcast. And we look forward to more work from you.
Thank you so much for your time, Mohua. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to listening to the podcast.
To you, our dearest listeners, you can find us on your favorite streaming services, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and of course on all other major streaming services. With loads of love, we are The Mohua Show, where we talk ईमानदारी से.